So, good morning, Professor Woolf. Thank you for
Hello,
agreeing
John.
to speak to us today. We're really
Pleasure.
grateful. And there's a whole lot I want to talk to you about. So, let's get going. So, let's now turn to the question that we're exploring in this series of interviews, which is why study Plato? So, it would be good to hear what your answer is to why study
Yes.
Plato.
Thanks, John. I think I think there are so many answers one could give because Plato himself is such a generous philosopher in the sense that I think he invites a number of different approaches. But for me, I would say um, maybe two connected things about why one should study Plato. I think the first thing is that he is still amazingly, almost kind of shockingly relevant for some of the problems that we face today. So, we were talking about this earlier, but one of the things that one's immediately struck when one reads Plato is his obsession with the idea of the power of language and the power of communication to do bad as well as to do good. So when you read Plato and you read some of his critiques, particularly in what's probably my favorite Platonic work, a work called the Gorgias, and you read it's a searing critique of the power of language to be misused, to exploit, to manipulate people for selfish ends. And then you look at the way that mass communication works today, whether it's, political demagogues or social media, and you think, my God, this is absolutely, it can almost be a depressing thought. Nothing has changed since Plato wrote his critique. But there's an astonishing kind of shock of the old, if you like, when you go to Plato, you think, my goodness, this stuff he's talking about, it's possibly the most central problem of our age, which is how do we make the use of language and the use of communication a force for good rather than a force for bad. And Plato had his own views on that. And I think that we don't always necessarily have to agree with his solutions, but his uncanny power to sort of identify problems which remain central to our efforts to organize ourselves into good societies and live good lives, I think is inexhaustible. More relevant perhaps than he might have hoped. Perhaps he might have hoped that we could have sorted things out by now, 2,400 years later. But I think going back to Plato and thinking about some of the ways that he identifies these problems can provide a very valuable resource for addressing some of our own problems. So he remains absolutely central, I would say, John, in thinking about how we solve our problems.
And then just staying with this question, why study Plato? You've answered in terms of what's happening within our society. But what about at the level of the individual? Is there anything for the individual to be gained from reading Plato?
Absolutely. I mean, firstly, and I think this is not to be underestimated, he's a wonderful writer, and I think that again, it's not. I think sometimes philosophical purists will say, well, what's that got to do with with anything? Well, if you're reading somebody who's a wonderful writer, then you're going to enjoy reading, and you're going to engage more, I think, than reading somebody who doesn't draw you in with the power of the gift of their writing. But I'd say for the individual, there are two things. I mean, firstly, Plato does very much address the individual in his work. I mean, something that people, for example, if you ask people what's Plato's Republic about, they would say, oh, well, it's about Plato's ideal society. Well, actually, I don't want to deny that there's an element of truth in that, but actually what gets the Republic started is the question of why should I, as an individual, be a good person rather than a bad person. So the way Plato puts this, as he says, the way Socrates puts this, why should I be just when it seems to be so often to my advantage to be unjust. And of course, again, relating this to what we were talking about in terms of social problems, I think what Plato has in mind is the idea that, you know, if I'm a powerful individual, then why shouldn't I exploit my power to my own benefit, rather than act in a morally good way? And I think he has a great gift for communicating this as a question for individuals. If we're thinking about how to live our lives, why exactly shouldn't I live a life that exploits and manipulates others if that gives me more power or more wealth or makes me more secure? And the question of the Republic is actually fundamentally that question, and it's about why should I? And his answer, I mean, to put it very briefly, is, well, because ultimately it's better for my soul if I'm a good person than if I'm a bad person. And so I think he wants to address individuals perhaps primarily and say, look, let me help you think about your life choices, and let me at least present you with some arguments that might lead you into a path of leading a just life rather than an unjust life. So I think very urgently he sees this as an issue for individuals, and that actually the questions about wider society that he raises are actually start off as questions about how do we make for good individuals, and how do we motivate people to be good individuals. Maybe if I could add one very brief
please do.
thing to that, John. I think it's sort of connected, but it's the idea that I think this has both an individual and a social dimension. That what you see when you read Plato is Plato, and it's something that's kind of not entirely unique to Plato, but I think he's still the most kind of forceful exponent of this, that he portrays people having conversations with each other, right? And I think there's a huge lesson there in terms of Plato and the individual today, where I think he's encouraging us, look, we all have our differences, we all have our different points of view. How about we try talking to each other? How about we try having a conversation? Let's keep having a conversation, because what he shows Socrates doing time and again, even when it seems like, you know, it's not necessarily getting him very far. The only answer is conversation. The only answer is talking to each other, rather than trying to live in silos and kind of, you know, either literally or metaphorically sort of throwing barbs at each other from our kind of silos. Try and talk to each other and try and find some agreement that way. And the fact that he doesn't say that, he demonstrates it happening. It is a very distinctive reason, I think, for the individual to be interested in Plato today.
Well, thank you very much. It's a really full and really interesting answer.